Alright, Ghost of Tabor has finally been released on February 8, which is today on the upload of this video, to the official MetaQuest storefront graduating from App Lab. Tabor is a hardcore extraction shooter in VR with survival mechanics, so far the first and only one of its kind at a large scale. First, I want to give the game a quick overview with my thoughts on the game and show a side-by-side graphics comparison. If you find the video useful, consider subscribing. So with this release, the base game's price goes from $20 to $25, or if you get the starter pack, which costs $43, that essentially includes DLC, that is pay to skip the grind, getting your traders to level 2, and it gives you a head start early game with weapons and consumables. Or there's the Ghost of Tabor independent starter pack that is $60, that includes everything from the starter pack plus an arm patch and all upcoming DLC. If you're like me that purchased the game and DLC beforehand, everything transfers over, so there's no need to repurchase the game unless you really want to support the devs further. And let's talk about the game. Ghost of Tabor is a VR survival extraction shooter. Tabor has its fun moments. Experiencing it in virtual reality takes it to the next level. You can craft your ammo inside your bunker's hideout, build an armory of weapons, have a personal shooting range, trade in items for cash, and see your Karuna stack up. Tabor has its charm. At times, it comes close to being one of my favorite shooters on Quest, but to be completely honest with you, it's not a perfect game at all. You'll either learn to love it or hate it. I'm between both sides, where you can see the vision for this game to essentially become Tarkov in VR. Coming from Tarkov, getting into Tabor was pretty easy. It's Tarkov in VR, but without everything that makes Tarkov great. Where Tarkov early on leaned on its hardcore mechanics, gunplay, lore, world design, progression, quests, and graphics, Tabor doesn't really do any of those things particularly well in its category, apart from being the only VR extraction shooter currently. Tabor started out as an open alpha, went to a beta, to now having a full release and labeling itself as a live service game. Before releasing into the MetaQuest storefront, Combat Waffle Studios, the developer of the game, revealed that it had generated more than 10 million in revenue from App Lab and Steam together. That itself is a feat, including the game being on App Lab. The game certainly caters to an audience and demographic like me that enjoy hardcore shooters, but a worry that I have later is that the game introduced DLC way too early. Not even a year from release, it includes the Uwu and Terran tactical pack. In general, I have nothing against 40-year-old males having an Alton helmet with cat ears or customizable skins. It's good fun and adds another way to continue further supporting the devs for their hard work. However, with the ongoing state of the game, with its crashes, bugs, and missing and incomplete features, it kind of puts into perspective where their priorities are despite yielding 10 million in revenue. The gameplay loop is simple: stay alive and extract. Then there is the in-game fetch quest that you queue up and complete to level up your traders to buy better equipment, consumables, and gear, increasing your chances of survival and lethality to others. The problem I could see coming in the future is that they lean too heavily on making the game more and more difficult, just for the sake of it. Just like Tarkov, it follows the lead of making your life as miserable as possible. Even the dev admitted that this is just the beginning of the hardcore elements being implemented. Look, not every game should be for everybody and appeal to a casual audience, but when you make your game hard just by doubling trader rep and making people do tasks like kill 20 Phoenix, which is the enemy AI in the game, the Scav faction, and it isn't all that difficult to do, and it's actually pretty easy to complete, but it gets boring really quick. The progression is slow and at best hides the fact that there isn't much to the game. My overall thoughts on Tabor is that you are essentially back in a game for the hopes that one day it could be Tarkov in VR and experience many people, including me, want. And lastly, even with my critiques of Tabor, it's shown that it can still be an incredibly successful game for an indie VR dev team. With losing its beta tag, a new level of expectations comes with it as well. If Ghost of Tabor succeeds in building a game with an enjoyable gameplay loop, better optimization, fixing the minor to game-breaking bugs, and staying true to its live service tag, expect a whole lot more weapon skins, but also a better game. This game has the potential to be one of the main attractions of the Quest platform and for the entirety of of VR. I can't fully recommend Tabor, but its extraction shooter aspect differentiates it from every other shooter currently. It's fun at times, but really buggy. Considering dropping items or touching an in-game object a certain way might yeet it halfway across the map. And one thing that it doesn't borrow from Tarkov are queue times, as often you're in a match in a matter of seconds, which is impressive, and both games run with completely different engines. But Tabor doesn't really have much to load at all. So the next talking point is obviously graphics and performance. With the launch of Ghost of Tabor on the official storefront, it doesn't officially get or have a Quest 3 upgrade. On both headsets, whether on Quest 2 or 3, the game utilizes Application Space Warp. Application Space Warp has the display refresh rate from running at a native target at, say, 72 Hz and having that to 36 Hz with utilizing frame extrapolation and frame reprojection. So the 36 of those frames would be considered real frames, while the other remaining 36 are synthesized fake frames. For the most part, games using Application Space Warp, while usually not being heavily movement oriented, work, as Application Space Warp, even with its own overhead, gives up to a 70% compute budget in the best case scenarios. Sort of like DLSS 3 with frame generation but on mobile. Games like Grid Legends, a racing game, or Lego Brick Tales, a Lego building game, are fine when there isn't much movement. However, in Ghost of Tabor, it's a crutch to the standalone experience, as things like visual artifacts, ghosting, and input and movement latency get introduced. If you play games on Quest 2 or 3 that run natively at 72, 90, or even 120 Hz, nothing comes close to native, and Application Space Warp doesn't compare to the real thing. Application Space Warp is used and treated to lower the barrier of entry for developers who don't have the experience for optimizing games on a mobile platform. Ghost of Tabor is heavily GPU dependent, and it runs better on Quest 3, with Quest 3 getting a massive gain on the GPU side. With Application Space Warp, it sounds like magic, but it has its own drawbacks and limitations, and in this comparison you could see Tabor runs noticeably smoother and better compared to Quest 2. I wouldn't advise purchasing this game if you're on Quest 2, as it can certainly make you nauseated, as the frame rate is all over the place with constant dips and stutters. On Quest 3, it's a different story, because with the performance charts you can easily tell that there's available headroom to work with on CPU and GPU on the graphs. It still runs at the same frame rate as Quest 2, but without the frame dips and stutters. On Quest 2, Ghost of Tabor needs Application Space Warp to run at all. Isn't as crucially needed to the experience, but could be later on with improvements coming forth with graphics and the game getting larger overall. Playing on Quest 3, it's leagues better compared to playing on Quest 2, with the game utilizing Application Space Warp. If you have Quest Games Optimizer, you can make the game run at a smoother 60 Hz, reprojecting to 120 Hz, which is a way better experience. Coupled side by side with Quest 2, if you're going to purchase this game, at least do it on Quest 3. Just purchasing the game gives you access to the Quest 2 and Quest 3 version, and it's cross-buy as well, so you get the PCVR version on the Oculus PC app. By far the best version of Tabor is the PCVR version of the game, and I usually play Tabor on Quest 3, as spotting people or enemies is easier with the level of detail on objects and people being near non-existent, offering a better view and being able to spot people. I prefer a higher frame rate compared to an improvement on graphics. If you have Quest Games Optimizer, you can push the game at 60 Hz with interpolating and reprojection for the better experience at 120 Hz. Tabor visually looks horrible compared to many other shooters in standalone VR. And Ghost of Tabor is a mixed bag for me, because currently I wouldn't say it does one thing particularly well. Being the only real extraction shooter in VR certainly helps. Tabor has its moments where you have an extremely good raid, making close to 1 million Karunas in just one raid, taking down a fully kitted 3-man squad by yourself and building personalized kits to take into raids, taking down AI enemy bosses like Kurtek and taking his helmet, one-tapping little Timmys, yelling to random people in VoIP, and building up your bunker. But I just find the game boring and unnecessarily grindy in order to make up for the missing content in the game. I do think it might be worth checking out depending on the individual. Tabor, even after the official MetaQuest storefront release, is still in its very early ages in development, and a game like Tarkov has been in beta for about 7 years. The game is cheap at $25, and if you get a referral code, that's even better, but it also does a good job in making you spend the full $43 just to skip the grind and actually focus on playing the game. Tabor is a game that will continue to grow, and the product currently from a year's time could be entirely different. And if you go into the game, keep your expectations settled. And yeah, that's pretty much it. If you liked the video, drop a like, consider subscribing for similar content on VR game comparisons, reviews, impressions, news, and updates. And until the next video, see ya.